My name is Serafina, and I thought I knew my family until the day my mother threw away what she called worthless junk from Grandpa's estate. 3 black garbage bags sat by our curb destined for the landfill. Something inside me couldn't let his memory be discarded so carelessly. When I tore open the first bag, my hands trembling, I found a leather portfolio hidden beneath old clothes. Inside were documents that would destroy everything I believed about my family. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this unbelievable family drama that completely shattered my world, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever discovered something that changed everything you thought you knew about your family, you're going to want to stick around for this story. Hit that like button if you're ready for some serious family revenge drama, and don't forget to subscribe because this tale of betrayal and justice is just getting started. The portfolio contained copies of my grandfather's will bank statements and correspondence that painted a picture so shocking I had to read everything twice. My grandfather, Robert Sterling, had been a successful businessman who owned 3 rental properties and had accumulated nearly $2 million in assets over his lifetime. According to these documents, he had left specific instructions for his estate distribution. My mother, Diana, had told our family that Grandpa died nearly broke, leaving only enough money to cover his funeral expenses and a few personal items. She claimed his medical bills had eaten through his savings and that his house had been heavily mortgaged. We all believed her because she was the executor of his estate, and frankly, none of us had reason to question her integrity back then. But the bank statements told a different story entirely. The accounts showed substantial balances right up until the week after his funeral. Then, systematic withdrawals began appearing, all authorized by my mother as the estate executor. Property deeds revealed that she had quietly sold his rental properties to a company called Sterling Holdings, LLC, which further investigation revealed was a business entity she had created just months before his death. The will itself was the most damning piece of evidence. Grandpa had specifically requested that his estate be divided equally among his 4 grandchildren, myself, my brother Marcus, my cousin Elena, and my cousin David. He had also set aside funds for each of our children's college educations and had designated money for various charities he supported. None of this had happened. Instead, my mother had filed a different will with the probate court, one that left everything to her as his only surviving child. I found a letter from Grandpa's attorney expressing confusion about the discrepancy between the will he had helped draft and the one being probated. My mother had apparently convinced him that Grandpa had changed his mind in his final weeks and had prepared the new document himself. Reading through Grandpa's personal correspondence broke my heart. Letters to my mother showed his concern about her financial difficulties following her divorce from my father. He had been trying to help her get back on her feet, but he had also been very clear about his intentions for his estate. In one letter he wrote, "Diana, I want to help you now while I'm alive, but I need you to understand that my estate has been planned carefully to benefit all my grandchildren equally. This has always been my intention, and I trust you to honor this when the time comes." The most devastating discovery came in the form of a handwritten note I found tucked inside the portfolio. It was in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting and dated just 2 weeks before his death. "If anything happens to me, Serafina should know that I've hidden copies of my true will and important documents. Diana doesn't know about the safe deposit box at First National Bank. The key is taped under the bottom drawer of my desk. My grandchildren deserve to know the truth." My hands shook as I held this note. Grandpa had suspected something might happen. He had taken precautions, but somehow my mother had still managed to circumvent his wishes. The safe deposit box key was likely long gone disposed of when she cleaned out his house with suspicious efficiency. The financial manipulation went deeper than just the inheritance fraud. I discovered that my mother had been using her power of attorney during Grandpa's final months to transfer money from his accounts into her own. She had justified these transfers to the bank as caregiving expenses and medical costs, but the amounts were excessive and clearly fraudulent. Some transfers had occurred on days when Grandpa was in the hospital and couldn't possibly have authorized them. But perhaps the most personally hurtful discovery was evidence of the contempt and manipulation she had shown toward our entire family. I found emails between her and her financial advisor discussing managing the family narrative and ensuring the cousins don't ask too many questions. She had deliberately played up Grandpa's supposed financial difficulties, even going so far as to stage conversations about his mounting debts in front of witnesses. The portfolio also contained receipts and invoices that revealed another layer of her deception. She had hired an estate sale company to liquidate Grandpa's belongings, claiming to us that she was honoring his wish for simplicity. In reality, she had sold valuable antiques jewelry and collectibles that were specifically mentioned in his true will as bequests to his grandchildren. A Victorian ring that was supposed to come to me had been sold for $3,000. Marcus's promised pocket watch collection had brought in $1,500. Elena's designated china set had fetched $800. Reading through all this evidence, I felt a mixture of rage and heartbreak that I had never experienced before. This wasn't just about money, though the financial impact was devastating for all of us. Marcus was struggling to pay for his daughter's medical treatments, and the inheritance would have been life-changing for him. Elena had been trying to save for a house down payment for years. David was drowning in student loan debt, but beyond the financial betrayal was the emotional devastation. My mother had looked each of us in the eye at Grandpa's funeral and lied to us about his final wishes. She had comforted us in our grief while simultaneously stealing our grandfather's legacy. She had manipulated our mourning process, using our trust and our respect for family hierarchy against us. The final piece of evidence I found was perhaps the most infuriating. It was a vacation brochure for a luxury European cruise with my mother's handwriting noting, "Booked with estate funds." While we had all struggled financially and mourned what we believed was Grandpa's impoverished final years, she had been planning to spend his money on lavish trips. As I sat surrounded by these documents in my living room, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my family dynamics was built on lies. My mother wasn't the struggling single parent she portrayed herself to be. She was a calculated fraudster who had betrayed not just legal documents, but the sacred trust of family itself. The weight of discovery demanded action, but I knew I had to be strategic. Confronting my mother directly would only give her time to destroy evidence or fabricate explanations. Instead, I spent the next week making copies of everything and researching my legal options. I reached out to Grandpa's original attorney, Thomas Mitchell, who had drafted the legitimate will. Meeting with Mitchell was both validating and devastating. He confirmed that the will my mother had probated was not the one he had prepared with Grandpa. "Your grandfather was very specific about his intentions." Mitchell explained, his weathered face showing genuine distress. When Diana presented that other document, I questioned it immediately, but she insisted Robert had changed his mind. She said he felt the grandchildren were too irresponsible to handle significant inheritance, and that he wanted to simplify things by leaving everything to her. "That doesn't sound like Grandpa at all," I replied, my voice tight with controlled anger. "No, it doesn't," Mitchell agreed. "Robert spoke about each of you grandchildren with such pride. He showed me pictures, told me about your achievements, your struggles. He specifically wanted to help Marcus with his daughter's medical expenses and ensure Elena could afford college for her boys. But Diana was so convincing, and she had legal authority as executor. Without proof of fraud, my hands were tied." Mitchell examined the documents I had brought. His expression grew increasingly grave as he reviewed the bank statements and correspondence. "This is substantial evidence of estate fraud and embezzlement," he said finally. "But you need to understand challenging a probated will is extremely difficult. The courts generally consider probate proceedings final unless there's overwhelming evidence of fraud or undue influence." "What about the financial transfers while he was still alive?" I asked. "Those are potentially criminal charges, not just civil matters. If you can prove she used power of attorney for unauthorized personal benefit, that's elder abuse and theft. The statute of limitations hasn't expired." I left Mitchell's office with a clear plan. First, I would gather additional evidence by contacting the bank that held Grandpa's accounts. Second, I would reach out to my cousins and brother to inform them of what I had discovered. Third, I would consult with a criminal attorney about filing charges. But before any of that, I decided to confront my mother directly with a hidden recording device to see if I could get her to admit to the fraud. The confrontation took place on a sunny Thursday afternoon at her house. I had called ahead saying I wanted to discuss some of Grandpa's things I had found. She welcomed me warmly, completely unaware of what was coming. Mom, I found some interesting documents in those bags you threw away. I began keeping my voice level. Her expression shifted slightly. Oh, just some old paperwork. Nothing important. Actually, I found bank statements and a will that looks different from what was probated. I watched her face carefully as I spoke. The color drained from her cheeks, but she maintained her composure. Honey, your grandfather was confused in his final months. He made several versions of his will. I made sure the correct one was filed. The correct one according to whom? I pressed. Because the attorney who drafted the original will says he never prepared the version you submitted to probate. That was when her mask slipped completely. Her voice became sharp and defensive. You don't understand how difficult it was dealing with your grandfather's affairs. He had debts you don't know about. I had to make hard decisions to protect this family. What debts? These bank statements show substantial assets, not debts. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Serafina, you're misunderstanding the situation. Sometimes family members have to make difficult choices for the greater good. The greater good or your good? I pulled out copies of the property sale documents. Sterling Holdings, LLC is your company, isn't it? The silence that followed was deafening. When she finally turned back to face me, her expression had hardened into something I had never seen before. You have no idea what you're messing with, she said quietly. Your grandfather wanted me to have those properties. The will you found is outdated. Then why did you create your LLC months before he died? Why were you planning this before he was even gone? Her response chilled me to the bone. Because I knew he would change his mind about leaving money to you kids. None of you are responsible enough to handle real money. Look at Marcus always asking for handouts. Elena can't even manage her own household, and David has been useless since college. So you decided for him. You forged documents and stole our inheritance because you thought you knew better. I didn't forge anything. She snapped, then caught herself. I mean, the will I submitted was legitimate. Robert gave me those properties because I took care of him. I sacrificed years of my life managing his care. But I had heard enough. The recording device in my purse had captured her admissions about the properties and her derogatory comments about her own nephews and son. More importantly, her defensive responses had revealed the depth of her deception. Mom, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you file a false will with the probate court? She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating her response. Finally, she said, I filed the will that best reflected Robert's true intentions, regardless of what some outdated document might have said. That was enough. I had what I needed, but as I prepared to leave, she grabbed my arm. Serafina, you cannot pursue this. It will destroy our family. Think about what this will do to Marcus and Elena. Do you want to put them through a legal battle? Do you want to tear apart everything we've built together? What we've built together. I pulled my arm free. You mean what you've stolen from us? Her final words as I walked out the door revealed the true extent of her manipulation. If you try to fight this, I'll make sure everyone knows about Marcus's gambling problems and Elena's affair. I have information that could destroy their marriages. Don't think I won't use it. Standing in her driveway, I realized that my mother wasn't just a thief. She was a master manipulator who had been collecting ammunition against her own family members for years. The woman I had loved and trusted had been weaponizing our secrets and vulnerabilities, preparing for the day when someone might challenge her authority. But her threats only strengthened my resolve. It was time to bring the truth to light regardless of the consequences. The drive home from my mother's house felt surreal. 24 hours earlier, I had believed my mother was a struggling single parent who had handled Grandpa's modest estate with grace under difficult circumstances. Now I knew she was a calculated criminal who had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from her own family while emotionally manipulating us into feeling grateful for her sacrifices. My first call was to Marcus. My younger brother had always been the family peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts and gave everyone the benefit of the doubt. Breaking this news to him would be devastating, but he deserved to know the truth. Serafina, what's wrong? He answered after the first ring. You sound terrible. Marcus, I need you to sit down. I've discovered something about Grandpa's estate that's going to change everything. I walked him through the documents I had found, reading him portions of bank statements and the original will. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke, his voice hollow. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" "I've had it verified by Grandpa's original attorney. Marcus' mom stole our inheritance and lied to our faces about it." When he spoke again, there was a tremor in his voice that broke my heart. "The money from Grandpa's supposed life insurance policy that she gave me for Sarah's surgery, that was your money anyway. It was part of your rightful inheritance, but she made it seem like a gift so you'd feel grateful instead of entitled." I heard him take a shaky breath. "Sarah needed that surgery so badly, and when Mom said Grandpa had left a small life insurance policy, I was so grateful. I must have thanked her 100 times for helping us navigate the insurance claims." "There was no insurance claim, Marcus. She gave you a fraction of what Grandpa actually left for you, and she made you grovel for it." The conversation with Elena was even more emotionally charged. My cousin had always struggled financially as a single mother of twin boys working 2 jobs to make ends meet. When I told her that Grandpa had specifically set aside money for her children's college funds, she started crying. "You mean my boys could have had college money this whole time?" she sobbed. "I've been working myself to death, taking on extra shifts, watching other people's kids on weekends, all to try to save for their education, and the money was already there. Not just college money, Elena. You were supposed to inherit enough to buy a house to give your boys stability. Grandpa wanted you to have security." Elena's grief quickly transformed into rage. "That woman watched me struggle for 3 years. She watched me miss my boys' school events because I was working. She watched me cry about not being able to afford soccer league fees, and she had the money the entire time." David's reaction was perhaps the most explosive. At 28, he was drowning in student loan debt and working a job he hated just to make minimum payments. When I explained that Grandpa had left specific funds to help with his education costs, he was speechless for several minutes. "I've been eating ramen noodles and living in a studio apartment with 3 roommates because of these loans," he finally said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "I turned down job opportunities because they didn't pay enough to cover my loan payments. I've been suffering for years, and Aunt Diana knew exactly how to fix it but chose not to." Building our alliance required careful planning. We all agreed that we needed legal representation, but we also needed to be strategic about how we approached the situation. My mother's threats about exposing family secrets had not been idle. She had mentioned Marcus's gambling problems, which were real, but in his past, and Elena's affair, which had ended her previous relationship, but happened years ago. We knew she would weaponize anything she could to deflect from her own crimes. Our first step was consulting with a criminal defense attorney who specialized in elder abuse and financial fraud. Jennifer Walsh was recommended by Thomas Mitchell, and her reputation for handling family financial crimes was impressive. When we met with her as a group, she reviewed our evidence with the thoroughness of a surgeon. "This is one of the most clear-cut cases of estate fraud I've encountered," Walsh told us. "Your mother violated her fiduciary duty as executor, committed embezzlement through the power of attorney transfers, and submitted fraudulent documents to a court of law. The evidence you've gathered is substantial." "What kind of consequences are we looking at?" Elena asked. "If convicted on all charges, she could face 5 to 10 years in prison depending on the exact amount stolen. She would also be required to pay full restitution with interest. However, you need to understand that pursuing criminal charges will be emotionally devastating for your entire family." Walsh also connected us with a probate attorney who specialized in will contests. Even though the original estate had been probated 3 years earlier, the discovery of fraud opened a window for challenging the previous ruling. We learned that we could potentially recover not just the original inheritance amounts, but also investment returns that money would have earned over the past 3 years. As we built our legal case, we also had to navigate the complex family dynamics. My mother had allies within our extended family relatives who believed her version of events and saw our challenge as ungrateful grandchildren attacking a grieving daughter. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, called me after somehow learning about our legal consultations. "Serafina, I can't believe you're doing this to your mother," Patricia said, her voice filled with disappointment. Diana sacrificed everything to take care of your grandfather in his final years. She managed his care, dealt with his medical needs, handled all his affairs. And now you want to drag her through the courts over money. Aunt Patricia, this isn't about greed. It's about the law. Mom violated the terms of Grandpa's will and stole money that belonged to all of us. Your grandfather was confused and sick at the end. Diana told me he changed his will multiple times. She filed the one that made the most sense. These conversations were exhausting because they revealed how effectively my mother had constructed her narrative. She had spent years building sympathy for herself as the dutiful daughter who had sacrificed her own life to care for an aging father. The idea that she might be a criminal was so contrary to this carefully constructed image that many family members simply couldn't accept it. But we also found unexpected allies. Grandpa's neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, reached out to us after hearing through the family grapevine about our legal action. She had maintained a friendship with Grandpa and had observed some troubling interactions between him and my mother during his final months. Your grandfather was worried about Diana, Mrs. Thompson told us during a coffee meeting at her kitchen table. He mentioned several times that she was pressuring him about financial matters. He said she kept telling him the grandchildren were irresponsible with money, but he didn't believe it. He talked about you kids with such love and pride. More importantly, Mrs. Thompson had witnessed several arguments between Grandpa and my mother about his will. Diana kept saying he needed to simplify his estate, that leaving money to young people would just cause problems. But your grandfather insisted that his grandchildren deserved their inheritance. I remember him saying, "Those kids are the future of this family, and they need to know I believed in them." Mrs. Thompson also revealed that my mother had asked her to sign a document as a witness about Grandpa's changed intentions regarding his will. I refused because I had never heard Robert say anything like what Diana was claiming. She got very angry with me and stopped bringing him over to visit after that. As our evidence mounted, we realized we had to make a critical decision about timing. Walsh had advised us that the longer we waited, the more opportunity my mother would have to hide assets or destroy additional evidence. But moving forward with criminal charges would irrevocably alter our family relationships. The tipping point came when Elena discovered that my mother had been monitoring her bank account and had somehow gained access to her employment records. She called me this week asking specific questions about my work schedule that she couldn't have known unless she was investigating me. Elena told us, "I think she's building a case to prove I'm an unfit mother, probably to discredit me before any legal proceedings." That revelation crystallized our understanding of who we were dealing with. My mother wasn't just trying to cover up her crimes. She was actively working to destroy our credibility and our lives. The woman who had raised me, who had taught me about family loyalty and moral integrity, was systematically targeting her own family members for psychological warfare. Marcus summed up our situation perfectly. We're not just fighting for money anymore. We're fighting for our right to exist in this family without being terrorized by someone who's supposed to love us. The decision to move forward with both criminal charges and a civil will contest was unanimous. But as we prepared for the legal battle ahead, none of us could have predicted that our strongest ally would turn out to be our greatest betrayer. 3 weeks into building our legal case, I received a call that shattered my faith in family bonds completely. It was from Jennifer Walsh, our attorney, and her voice carried a gravity that made my stomach drop. "Serafina, we need to meet immediately. Something has happened that changes everything about your case." When Marcus, Elena, David, and I gathered in Walsh's office that afternoon, she delivered news that felt like a physical blow. "Your cousin David has withdrawn from the case and is now cooperating with your mother's defense team." The silence in the room was deafening. Elena was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean, cooperating?" Walsh pulled out a folder thick with documents. "David signed an affidavit yesterday stating that he believes the will your mother probated was legitimate. He claims that your grandfather expressed concerns about leaving large sums to the other grandchildren and that he supports your mother's handling of the estate." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. That's impossible. David was as outraged as any of us when he learned about the fraud. He was drowning in student loans because of what Mom did. According to his statement, he now believes that your grandfather intended for Diana to have discretionary control over distributing any inheritance. and that she acted appropriately in giving him smaller amounts as needed rather than lump sum payments. Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his face pale. Why would he do this? What could possibly motivate him to betray us like this? Walsh hesitated before answering. Your mother's attorney informed me that David has recently received a substantial payment to help with his student loans. They claim it was delayed distribution from the estate money that Diana had been holding in trust until David demonstrated financial responsibility. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. David hadn't just abandoned our cause. He had actively undermined it by providing testimony that supported my mother's narrative. Worse, he had done it for money, allowing himself to be bought with what was likely a fraction of his actual inheritance. Elena started crying, not from sadness, but from rage. He sat in my living room 2 weeks ago and held my boys while we talked about how this money could change their lives. He looked me in the eye and promised we would see this through together, and he sold us out for his loan payments. The tactical implications were devastating. David's defection didn't just remove an ally. It provided my mother with a family witness who could testify that Grandpa had indeed intended for her to have control over the estate distribution. His statement included claims that Grandpa had privately expressed concerns about Marcus's past gambling issues and Elena's ability to manage money as a single mother. How much did she pay him? I asked, though the answer hardly mattered. According to the paperwork, $60,000 to address his immediate financial needs with promises of additional support as he demonstrates continued responsibility. $60,000. It was probably less than half of what David would have inherited under Grandpa's original will, but it was enough to make his immediate problems disappear. My mother had once again demonstrated her skill at manipulation, offering just enough relief to buy loyalty while keeping the majority of the stolen inheritance for herself. The worst part was reading David's actual statement. It wasn't just a simple affidavit supporting my mother's actions. It was a detailed character assassination of the rest of us. He claimed that I had always been jealous of my mother's close relationship with Grandpa and that my accusations were motivated by resentment rather than truth. He said Marcus had asked him for money multiple times over the years and had a history of financial irresponsibility that would justify Grandpa's concerns. Most cruelly, he described Elena as emotionally unstable and suggested that her children might be better off if she didn't have access to large sums of money. This is exactly what Mom threatened she would do, I told Walsh. She said she had information that could destroy our relationships and our reputations. She's using David to do it. But the betrayal went deeper than just the legal implications. Walsh informed us that David had apparently been in contact with my mother for several weeks, feeding her information about our legal strategy and the evidence we had gathered. Your mother's legal team seems to know details about your case that they should only have learned through discovery proceedings, Walsh explained. They've already prepared counter-arguments to points you haven't even raised yet. Marcus looked devastated. David was at every family meeting. He knew our entire strategy. He knew which witnesses we planned to contact, which documents we were using as evidence, everything. The scope of David's betrayal became clear as Walsh walked us through the implications. Not only had he undermined our legal position, but he had also provided my mother with intelligence that allowed her to sabotage other aspects of our case. Mrs. Thompson, our neighbor witness, had suddenly become unavailable and was now claiming she had been misunderstood about what she had witnessed. The bank records we needed for our case had become more difficult to access due to privacy challenges that seemed to appear overnight. Elena wiped her tears and looked at us with a determination I had never seen before. She played us perfectly, didn't she? She knew exactly which one of us would be most vulnerable to a buyout. It was true. David had been the one struggling most visibly with financial pressure. His student loans had been affecting every aspect of his life, and my mother had observed this during our family gatherings over the years. She had identified his weakness and exploited it with surgical precision. "What does this mean for our case?" Marcus asked. Walsh was honest about our new reality. David's defection significantly complicates things. His testimony provides credibility to your mother's version of events, and his claims about your grandfather's concerns regarding the other beneficiaries will be difficult to counter. We're no longer just challenging fraudulent documents. We're fighting against a family member who will testify that the fraud was actually legitimate estate planning. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of David's betrayal was how it shattered our understanding of family loyalty. We had believed that discovering the truth would unite us against my mother's deception. Instead, it had revealed that family members could be purchased, that blood relationships offered no protection against greed and manipulation. The meeting ended with a stark choice. We could continue our legal battle, knowing that we now faced not just my mother's resources and legal team, but also testimony from a family member who would actively work to discredit us. Or we could accept that my mother had outmaneuvered us and abandon our pursuit of justice. Walking out of Walsh's office that day, I felt more isolated than I had ever felt in my life. The family I had believed in, the trust and loyalty I had taken for granted, had been revealed as illusions. My mother was a criminal, and my cousin was a traitor. The question that remained was whether Marcus, Elena, and I had the strength to continue fighting when the odds had turned so dramatically against us. But as we stood in the parking lot outside the law office, Elena grabbed both Marcus and my hands. "I don't care what David does," she said fiercely. "I don't care how much money she paid him or what lies he's willing to tell. My boys deserve to know that I fought for their future even if I lose." Marcus nodded slowly. "Grandpa believed in us enough to leave us that inheritance. The least we can do is believe in ourselves enough to fight for it." In that moment, I realized that David's betrayal, as painful as it was, had actually clarified something important. We weren't just fighting for money anymore. We were fighting to prove that truth and integrity still mattered, even when family members abandoned both. The morning after David's betrayal was revealed, I woke up feeling like I was drowning in quicksand. Every move we made seemed to make our situation worse, and my mother's ability to stay ahead of our legal strategy suggested she had resources and connections we hadn't anticipated. But sometimes help comes from the most unexpected sources. The call came from a number I didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end would change everything about our case. "Ms. Sterling, this is Rebecca Martinez. I'm a forensic accountant, and I believe I can help you with your case against Diana Sterling." My first instinct was suspicion. After David's betrayal, trust didn't come easily. "How do you know about our case, and why would you want to help?" "I've been investigating financial irregularities at Grandview Financial Services, where your mother has been a client for the past 4 years. During my investigation, I discovered transactions that appear to be connected to your grandfather's estate. When I learned about your legal proceedings through public records, I realized our investigations might be related." Rebecca explained that she had been hired by the State Financial Regulatory Board to investigate suspicious activity at Grandview Financial Services, a wealth management company that specialized in estate planning and asset management. Her investigation had uncovered a pattern of questionable transactions involving several clients, including my mother. "Your mother has been moving money through multiple accounts and investment vehicles in ways that suggest she's trying to hide assets," Rebecca told me during our first meeting. "The amounts and timing correspond closely with your grandfather's estate value." When Rebecca spread out her financial analysis on the conference table, the scope of my mother's financial manipulation became clear. She hadn't just stolen our inheritance. She had created an elaborate money laundering scheme to hide the stolen funds and generate additional income from our grandfather's assets. "After your mother sold your grandfather's properties through Sterling Holdings, LLC, she didn't keep the money in simple savings accounts," Rebecca explained, pointing to a complex flowchart of financial transactions. "She immediately invested the funds in high-yield accounts, purchased additional real estate, and even bought shares in several businesses. Over the past 3 years, your grandfather's stolen estate has grown to nearly $3 million. Marcus studied the documents with growing amazement. "She's been profiting from our inheritance while we struggled financially. More than that," Rebecca continued. "She's been using the estate money as collateral for additional loans, which she used to purchase more investment properties. Your mother has essentially built a real estate empire using your grandfather's stolen assets as the foundation." The evidence Rebecca provided was far more comprehensive than anything we had been able to gather on our own. As a forensic accountant with subpoena power, she had access to bank records, investment accounts, and business filings that we couldn't have obtained through normal legal channels. Her investigation revealed the full extent of my mother's financial crimes. But Rebecca's most valuable contribution wasn't just the financial evidence. She had also uncovered communications between my mother and her financial advisor that revealed the premeditated nature of her crimes. Email exchanges dating back to months before Grandpa's death showed detailed planning for estate optimization and asset protection strategies. Your mother began planning this theft almost 6 months before your grandfather died, Rebecca told us. These emails discuss strategies for managing family expectations and streamlining the inheritance process. They knew exactly what they were doing. One email exchange was particularly damning. My mother's financial advisor had written, "Diana, you need to understand that what you're proposing could be considered estate fraud if discovered. Are you certain the family won't challenge these arrangements?" My mother's response was chilling. The grandchildren are young and trusting. They'll believe whatever I tell them about Robert's final wishes. By the time they're old enough to understand estate law, the statute of limitations will have expired. Rebecca had also discovered that David's recent payment wasn't an isolated incident. Financial records showed that my mother had been making small payments to various family members over the years, creating a paper trail that suggested ongoing estate distributions. She's been covering her tracks by making it appear that she's been gradually distributing inheritance money as appropriate, Rebecca explained. David's payment fits this pattern, but the total amount distributed is less than 10% of the actual estate value. Perhaps most importantly, Rebecca's investigation had revealed that my mother's crimes extended beyond our family. She had been using similar strategies to manipulate the estates of other elderly clients at Grandview Financial Services. Your mother appears to be part of a larger scheme targeting vulnerable seniors and their families, Rebecca told us. Your case isn't isolated, it's part of a pattern. This revelation transformed our legal strategy completely. Instead of being a family dispute over a single estate, our case became part of a criminal investigation into systematic elder abuse and financial fraud. The state attorney general's office was now involved, and our evidence would be used not just to pursue civil remediation, but to build criminal cases against multiple defendants. Working with Rebecca also provided us with resources we hadn't had before. Her investigation included digital forensics that had recovered deleted emails and financial records that my mother thought she had destroyed. Security camera footage from bank locations showed my mother making transactions during times when Grandpa was hospitalized and couldn't have authorized the transfers. But perhaps the most emotionally significant evidence Rebecca discovered was a series of audio recordings that Grandpa had made during his final months. Apparently, he had been documenting his conversations with my mother about estate planning, possibly because he sensed something was wrong. Your grandfather was more aware of your mother's intentions than she realized, Rebecca told us as she prepared to play the recordings. These files were stored on his computer, which your mother sold after his death. The buyer turned the computer over to authorities when they discovered the recordings. Hearing Grandpa's voice again was almost too much to bear, but the content of the recordings was crucial to our case. In conversation after conversation, Grandpa clearly stated his intentions for his estate and explicitly rejected my mother's suggestions for simplification. In one particularly clear recording, we heard Grandpa say, "Diana, I appreciate your concern, but I've made my decisions about the inheritance. Serafina, Marcus, Elena, and David are all responsible young adults who deserve to benefit from what I've built. I won't change my will to exclude them no matter how much you think it would be easier." My mother's voice on the recordings revealed a manipulative persistence that was difficult to listen to. "Dad, you're not thinking clearly about the tax implications and the complications this will create. Let me handle the estate planning so the family doesn't have to deal with legal complications." But Grandpa's responses showed that he understood exactly what she was proposing. "I understand the complications, Diana, but I want my grandchildren to have their inheritance directly, not filtered through your judgment about what they deserve or when they're ready for it." The recordings not only proved that Grandpa had maintained his mental clarity regarding estate planning, but they also documented my mother's attempts to manipulate him into changing his will. Her persistent pressure and emotional manipulation were captured in detail, providing evidence of the undue influence that had been part of her strategy. Rebecca's involvement also brought credibility to our case that we couldn't have achieved on our own. As a state-appointed investigator with expertise in financial fraud, her testimony would carry weight that our family accusations might not have had. Her professional analysis of the evidence removed any suggestion that our case was motivated by greed or family resentment. But working with Rebecca also meant that our case was no longer entirely under our control. The state's investigation had its own timeline and priorities, and we had to coordinate our civil actions with the criminal proceedings. This actually worked in our favor because it meant my mother couldn't dismiss our case as a family squabble. She was now facing potential criminal charges that could result in significant prison time. The knowledge that my mother was part of a larger criminal enterprise was both vindicating and disturbing. It explained her sophisticated methods and her confidence in avoiding consequences, but it also meant that our family had been targeted by professional criminals rather than simply betrayed by a relative who made poor choices. As Rebecca prepared her final report for the state attorney general, she shared one more piece of information that would prove crucial in the final confrontation with my mother. "Your mother has been liquidating assets over the past month," Rebecca told us. "She's converting investments to cash and transferring money to offshore accounts. She knows the investigation is closing in and she's preparing to flee." This intelligence meant we had to act quickly. If my mother successfully moved her stolen assets out of the country, recovering our inheritance would become nearly impossible regardless of what the courts eventually ruled. The race against time had begun, and everything would depend on whether justice could move faster than my mother's criminal network. The final confrontation came sooner than any of us expected. Rebecca's warning about my mother's asset liquidation prompted an emergency court order freezing all her accounts, and within 48 hours, law enforcement was executing search warrants at her home and office. Marcus, Elena, and I watched from across the street as federal agents carried boxes of documents and computer equipment from the house where I had grown up. The sight of my mother being led away in handcuffs was surreal. This was the woman who had taught me to ride a bicycle, who had comforted me through heartbreaks, who had instilled in me the values of honesty and family loyalty that she had been systematically violating for years. As the patrol car pulled away, I felt a complex mixture of vindication and grief that I'm still processing today. The investigation moved quickly once law enforcement was involved. Within a week, they had uncovered evidence of fraud involving not just our family, but 7 other families whose elderly relatives had been clients at Grandview Financial Services. The total amount stolen exceeded $12 million, making it one of the largest elder abuse cases in our state's history. David's reaction to my mother's arrest was perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the entire ordeal. When he realized that his cooperation with her defense team had made him an accessory to criminal activity, he immediately contacted our attorney, begging to switch sides again. Jennifer Walsh's response was swift and merciless. "Your cousin chose money over family loyalty, and now he'll have to live with the consequences of that choice in court and in his conscience." David's $60,000 payment was seized as part of the asset recovery process, leaving him worse off than if he had never betrayed us in the first place. More importantly, his character testimony was completely discredited once the scope of my mother's criminal activity became public. The family member who had tried to paint us as unreliable and motivated by greed was now exposed as someone who had been bought by a criminal enterprise. The asset recovery process revealed the true extent of what my mother had stolen from our family. The properties she had purchased with Grandpa's money had appreciated significantly, and her investment strategies had been surprisingly successful. When everything was liquidated and properly distributed, each of us received nearly $400,000, substantially more than our original inheritance would have been. But the money, while life-changing, wasn't the most important outcome. Marcus was finally able to pay for his daughter's ongoing medical treatments without the constant stress of mounting debt. Elena bought her first home and established college funds for her boys. Even David, despite his betrayal, eventually received his proper inheritance after serving community service as part of a plea agreement for his cooperation with my mother's crimes. For me personally, the experience fundamentally changed how I understand family relationships. The blind trust I had placed in family loyalty was replaced by a more mature understanding that family members are individuals who make choices, and those choices define their character more than blood relationships do. My mother was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all the families she had defrauded. At her sentencing hearing, she finally showed something resembling remorse, though I suspect it was motivated more by the consequences she faced than genuine regret for her actions. The ripple effects throughout our extended family were significant. Aunt Patricia, who had initially defended my mother, struggled to reconcile the woman she thought she knew with the criminal who had been systematically stealing from elderly relatives. Some family members never fully accepted the truth, preferring to believe that my mother had been unfairly prosecuted or that the evidence had been misinterpreted. But Marcus, Elena, and I emerged from the experience with a stronger bond than we had ever had before. We had been tested by betrayal and manipulation, and we had chosen to support each other rather than save ourselves individually. The family we chose to maintain and strengthen proved more valuable than the biological relationships we lost. Mrs. Thompson, our elderly neighbor who had provided crucial testimony, became an honorary grandmother to all of us. She often said that helping us pursue justice had given her a sense of purpose during a difficult period of her own life. Her courage in standing up to my mother's intimidation tactics had been essential to building our case. Rebecca Martinez became more than just a professional ally. She became a friend who helped us understand the broader context of elder abuse and financial fraud. Her work on our case led to policy changes in how estates are monitored and how financial institutions report suspicious activity involving elderly clients. The experience taught me that justice isn't always swift or easy, but it's worth fighting for even when the personal costs are high. Watching my mother face consequences for her crimes didn't bring back my grandfather or undo the years of manipulation and lies, but it did restore my faith that truth and integrity still matter in a world that often seems to reward deception. Today, 3 years after Grandpa's stolen inheritance was recovered, I often think about the lessons he would have wanted us to learn from this experience. He valued hard work, honesty, and family loyalty, but I think he would have been proud that we fought for justice even when it meant confronting family members who had abandoned those values. The money he left us has indeed changed our lives, but not in the ways my mother predicted. Instead of making us irresponsible or entitled, it gave us security that allowed us to make better choices about our careers, relationships, and futures. Marcus became a volunteer advocate for families dealing with medical debt. Elena went back to school to become a social worker specializing in elder abuse prevention. I used part of my inheritance to start a nonprofit organization that provides legal support for families fighting estate fraud. Looking back, I realized that my mother's betrayal, while devastating, also revealed the strength and integrity that existed in the family members who chose to stand together. The people who supported us through the legal battle, who refused to be bought or intimidated, who chose truth over convenience. Those are the relationships that define family in the most meaningful sense. So, let me ask you this. Have you ever discovered something about a family member that completely changed how you saw them? Have you faced a situation where doing the right thing meant challenging someone you loved? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, because I've learned that family drama and the search for justice are experiences that connect all of us in unexpected ways. If this story of family betrayal and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. And share this video with anyone who might be facing their own family drama, because sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting my journey toward healing and justice. I hope that sharing what happened to my family can help others recognize the signs of manipulation and find the courage to fight back when they're being wronged. Remember, family loyalty should never require you to accept abuse or injustice. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold people accountable for their actions, even when those people are family. Until next time, stay strong, trust your instincts, and never let anyone convince you that you don't deserve the truth.